Most of the evidence on this fear and loathing across the party divide, if you will, most of the evidence is in the form of survey data, surveys where people have been asked, how do you feel about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and how do you feel about people who tend to vote Democratic or tend to vote Republican, or who are active in one set of organizations or another. And so we have these questions that have been asked by the American National Election Studies, which is the premier survey organization of the political science discipline. And these surveys go all the way back to the 1960s. And so we can track partisan sentiment over time. And when you do that, you notice that beginning in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Republicans and Democrats begin to voice, pretty harsh sentiments toward their opponents. I don't want to get into the details of the exact questions that are asked, but you can take my word for it. The evidence is pretty overpowering that since the early 1990s, there's a very clear willingness to express harsh, critical sentiments toward political opponents. So much so that today, the level of animus directed across the party divide exceeds the level of animus based on any other division or cleavage you can think of, including what most people consider, sort of the gold standard in terms of divisions, and that is race. So partisan animus today exceeds animus based on race or ethnicity. So if you want to put it differently, you could think about it. Racism is typically the way we describe biased attitudes based on race or ethnicity. Today, you might say partyism exceeds racism. Mm. So that covers so much the political front. Political attitudes are now characterized by this deep sense of ill will. The problem is that it has now spilled over. It extends far beyond the political domain. Party prejudice is now characterizing our daily interpersonal interactions, our social lives, what we do in our spare time. I'll just cite one example because it's pretty striking, and that has to do with our selection of spouses. To what extent are people dating and marrying on the basis of political agreement? That's a really interesting question because we have data on the political attitudes of family members. There's a classic study that was run in the 1960s, in 1965 to be precise, which surveyed a representative sample of high school seniors and also surveyed their mothers and their fathers. So we could estimate what is the extent to which the parents agreed. And you might be surprised to learn that in 1965, it was barely 60% of the couples that were surveyed had the same political affiliation, indicating that politics was not a big deal. People were not going out of their way to find someone they agreed with to spend the rest of their life, or to just, social relations were not constrained by politics. Today, well, we've replicated that study a couple of years ago, and today the level of homogeneity in American society is on the order of magnitude of 85%. Wow. The party registration agreement is almost, there's almost a consensus. And there are some really cool studies because of, we now have these online dating sites, and we've got a lot of data on what happens at those sites. And a couple of my colleagues at the Stanford Business School have published some really interesting papers showing that even though people at online dating sites are quite strategic about revealing their political views, they don't advertise that, oh, I voted for Trump in 2016. They don't want to constrain the market, so they tend to conceal their political views. Nonetheless, it turns out that the top predictor of who matches at these online dating sites is political ideology. So that's a really striking phenomenon.